Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 56. Don't forget to like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and the madness is here. We got a huge win from Texas Southern to open up the NCAA Tournament on Tuesday night, but Wyoming completely fell apart and basically did everything in their power to not cover the 4.5 points. But hey, a 1-1 night to start off the tournament, to start off March Madness. And the best part about it is there's more action tonight. And if you listen to the previous pod, you definitely know who I'm rolling with tonight, the nation's leading scorer and Bryant. But before we get in depth into that, just another reminder, be a pro and win with DRF Sports Pro. Introducing DRF Sports' all-new premium data feature on drf.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With the madness here, it's the best way to make some money this March and have fun while doing it. Again, DRF Sports Pro, sign up now at drf.com/sports. And hopefully we will keep up our pro picks here on the pod as well, as today we have a few bets recapping the tournament and our picks last night, Tuesday night that is, before we make some more bets on Wednesday night's action because there's two more games. And of course, the full bracket is set. We have a deep dive into who we're leaning on, who we're actually betting on Thursday and Friday. Got some best bets. We got some future picks for each region. All that and more with our guy, Matt Russell. And he joins us right about now. All right, we're here and the tournament is underway. We had games on Tuesday night, more games on Wednesday night. And of course, the big boy matchups start on Thursday. My dude, Matt Russell, is here. And first off, I just want to ask you, Tuesday night, Texas Southern. I was sitting on Texas Southern minus 3.5. Yes. I mean, hey, we'll take it. Great way to start the tournament off. One thing I will say, they got down early and I was itching to pull the trigger on them in game when they were down. It was like 11-5 or whatever, but like the number went up. You could get them at like even money to win, a little over even money to win. And I was just like, oh, plus money to, and I had to stop myself in the moment to be like, there's a full month of this left. Like it can't be, just chill. Just chill.
Yeah. Let's just dip our toe into the water here with Texas Southern and Texas Corpus Christi here for God's sake.
Right. Like I can't be that confident in Texas Southern to like come back and win this game. Like, what are we doing here? But on the flip side, I look at the late game and I was sitting on Wyoming and I had to remind myself again, as I'm getting mad, like they're doing everything in their power to not cover the game.
Unbelievable.
I had to remind myself, this is what March is, right?
Yes.
This is exactly what March is. It's like, how are these college kids? How are you not covering this game? How do you decide you're going to use this game to turn it over 10 times? What's my guy's name? Maldonado is their point guard. Just like, what's going on? But this is March and we love it. And look, we love having you on. How are you doing, my dude?
I'm good, man. You make such a good point, right? For one, like now that we're in the tournament here and we talked last week about this idea of let's get on top of things when it comes to live betting. Like these teams just can't, they have absolutely no chill. They're going to melt. And then you watch those two games and, for every one game that you're kicking yourself for not just hammering away on a Texas Southern, you get that other game, which honestly felt like a better live betting opportunity because you're watching that game and you're like, EK, right? 19, 20 point per game scorer can't make a layup around the basket. And like you mentioned, Maldonado turning the ball over, Jeffries, one of their sharpshooters, who's, all of these key elements to their team are sort of floundering in the first half. And it's still a 4 or 5 point game. And you're like, guys, like it was not going to take much to beat this Indiana team, right? Like first and foremost, you have to guard at some point Trace Jackson Davis, but like do something here that you would that you had been known for doing this season. And I mean, they tried, right? Maldonado's getting in the post, he's distributing, as we talked about, right? Like this kind of strange offense where the point guard gets guys and starts backing them down here, a little bit antiquated, but again, it becomes so sort of strange and hard to prepare for. But if you're just not going to make any shots, you're not going to make any free throws. The officiating in that first half was really wonky. Like, we had guys just absolutely hammering down on dudes' arms, especially Maldonado in the post, and like the referees didn't seem bothered by it in any way, shape, or form. And so you're just sort of sitting there going like, okay, like the run is coming, right? That was one of those weird games where it was like it just stayed at 5 points the entire game, right? Where normally you get like that the first game last night where it was this team ran 10-0 run, the other team 10-0 run, up one team's up 4, the other team's up 4. And strangely enough, right, like Texas Southern's actually, free throw shooting was impeccable yesterday, which is what allowed us to have a nice, comfortable cover in that last minute. You and I talked last week about how you're betting on what happens in the first 39 minutes of a college basketball game. And that last minute, you're just kind of hoping for anything to happen. And Indiana, right? Like, they're fouling guys on 3-pointers in the end of that game, right? Like, they're trying to give Wyoming the cover in that game, even though, honestly, I haven't checked the shot quality on this, but based on how many layups and how many relatively wide open threes that Wyoming missed, man, I imagine the shot quality in that game is actually probably, I shouldn't say probably, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if it looks like Wyoming should have won that game based on the shots created by that team. They just weren't able to make anything, both down low and on the outside.
Yeah, it was an absolutely just fun night to start it off with just a reminder of this is why we're here. This is what makes March Madness what it is. And let's go to the bracket though, because we want to talk about we're going to get to some picks we kind of gave out already what was going to happen or what sides we'd be on for Wednesday's games, but we'll talk about that at the very end of the pod. We'll also try to talk about, some betting strategies in terms of your bracket pools, all that fun stuff, survivor bets, all that. But we really want to take a deep dive into the bracket now that we've had some time to really kind of sit with it after our instant reaction, we'll say, on Sunday night to the bracket being released. So let's take a start in the West region. And what I'm going to try to do here is we'll kind of look at some games. We'll kind of look at the overall futures in terms of who we think is going to go pretty far, but also within that, going to try to hand out some picks as well, because I know the people want their picks for Thursday and Friday's games. So we'll try to get to that as well. But let's start in the West. And obviously we got Gonzaga here at the top, but one game that I'm, obviously, Gonzaga, Georgia State, cool, whatever. One thing that I'm very interested in as I look at Thursday's matchups is one thing I want you to tell me how you feel about this, but I like Boise State plus the 2.5 points over Memphis. Now, here's the thing, right? I'd like to think that Memphis should win, but to me, this is like I have a few themes that I like to ride with here when it comes to March. I like veteran teams, right? I like guard play, and I like shooting teams. Most importantly, shooting teams. If you can't shoot, and I know that sounds obvious. I know it does, but I mean, like, for sure. I know that sounds obvious, but like, here's the thing. We've already talked about that. I like Boise State at the plus 2.5 there. And I mean, yes, they're going to lose to Gonzaga. They're not making much of a run there, but it leads into one thing we always want to talk about in terms of when am I going to fade Gonzaga? Because they have a pretty easy path if I look at the top part of their bracket here, to me. But the Boise State matchup is the first place that I'm looking at where I can try to cash something here and say, hey, maybe there's some money to be made here.
Yeah, I'm waiting for this line to go up 1/2 more point here. Let's get this thing to +3 before we start really talking ourselves into Boise State. Memphis obviously has the higher upside, right? And so if you want to get really spicy in this game, to me, if you can find a good price, and this is going to be speaking of themes, right, from a betting standpoint, the theme here is price shopping when it comes to futures and that sort of thing. It is wild the difference some of these sports books have on some of these prices to win a region, right? You see teams, certain teams are 25-1, some places they're like 100-1, right? And obviously that matters. And the thing that makes my job difficult is I'm trying to preview each one of these regions and hand out a valuable bet for the region. And so there's a couple of hurdles right then and there. The first hurdle is there's not going to be a valuable bet on the top seeds, right? For example, the Gonzagas of the world, right? Depending on what the price is. And so, I look at this and I go, okay, well, I don't know that I'm dying to bet Boise State. I don't know if I'm dying to bet Memphis in this game. Again, if it goes to 3, I'm pretty much just going to have to at that point, just on a value basis. But what I sort of rather do here is I'm actually interested in Memphis in a regional futures at a massive payout type of a price, right? If Memphis is this team that has played essentially at a top 5 level from an efficiency standpoint since Emily Bates left, that's something that, okay, like maybe there's a high-end version of Memphis here that could knock off Gonzaga. And if they can knock off Gonzaga, they can clearly potentially beat UConn or Arkansas. And now you have them finding their way, into the second weekend, into the regional final, and you're sitting on something like 50-1. So if your sportsbook offers 50-1 on Memphis, why not throw a little bit on that? And now you have some quote unquote action, if you will, for that first game on the team that's the favorite. Obviously, bracket pool, another theme in all of this is you don't have to bet every game, that you'll have interest because you're playing the bracket, right? And so Memphis, Boise State, okay, who am I going to pick there? Here's the other element, right? Game strategy, another theme that we're going to talk about here. What are people going to do in their bracket contests, and why should we fade them? Well, if you're trying to win a bracket contest, I don't really care necessarily whether there's 10 people in your bracket contest or 1,000 people in your bracket contest. You have to do a little zigging when other people are zagging. And so one of the biggest tools that you can use for bracket contests is, let's sort of give this away right now, is the Who Picked Whom page on ESPN's Tournament Challenge. Now, you don't have to even be on ESPN or in ESPN's Tournament Challenge, right? You can run your pool anywhere else to use this function. And what I'm looking at right now is Memphis as a 62.3% selection rate, which of course means they are favored in the public as well, right? Which makes sense because that's where the point spread is headed. But if we truly think this game is a coin flip, right? Boise State on your bracket, it's going to get you 1 point in this, in the first round. And it's obviously going to have 62.3% of the population not get any points, right? So that's your advantage as far as having knowledge. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this if we never see +3 on Boise State, which is fine. Yeah. But again, if your price is 50-1, I would take that chance, because I'm here to ask you, when are you going to take Gonzaga out, man? Like that was the cliffhanger from Sunday, because I look at Gonzaga and just, really quickly on the Who Picked Whom Tournament Challenge thing and how this is sort of interesting. I opened up a sportsbook today and they had dropped their price on Gonzaga to make the Final Four, to win this region. They had dropped it to -140. It has been sitting around -180 for a while here. So to me, that tells me that they're getting some liability on teams other than Gonzaga, right? Yeah, obviously Texas Tech, Duke, and maybe some of these teams, Arkansas, UConn, in the quarter that the Gonzaga Bulldogs are in. But what's interesting about that is if you go to the Who Picked Whom, the percentage of people who took Gonzaga to win that region is 58.3%. Well, if you busted out your win probability calculator, right, -140 is an implied win probability of 58.3%. Like it's crazy how the actual public in picking Gonzaga to make it to the regional final, or excuse me, to make it to the Final Four to win the region, is the exact same as the odds sort of project here based on this move. So are they looking at the Who Picked Whom, or are they moving it on the money that they're getting, right? Like, I don't think they're looking at the Who Picked Whom, but it's funny that sort of equates to those two things being together. But what that means is that you can use the percentages on this page on ESPN.com to kind of come up with your own valuation, right? We have 6, 7, 8, 10 million people sort of weighing in. And that's not going to help you necessarily for point spreads or anything like that. But from a futures standpoint, it's actually telling that 58.3% of the population has Gonzaga moving into the Final Four. And that's the exact same percentage that a sportsbook dropped their price today. So I know that you're not taking Gonzaga to the Final Four.
No,
where are you having them get knocked out here? Let's get right into it.
So a couple super interesting things here before we get to that. Like, so as mentioned, Gonzaga, I think they have a pretty good run here, but ultimately coming out of this region, I have Texas Tech. So I have Texas Tech knocking out some big boys here, including Duke, right? And then going on to take on Gonzaga and, see ya, deuces. The thing here for me, right, is it's trying to find the value along the way, right? And and I think this is going to be, you're going to deal with a lot of high seeds in this tournament, but the other side, the way that I look at it is, everyone's looking for, you talked about the bracket and trying to pick the upsets or trying to make, the strategic moves and all that, right? The one thing that I would kind of, turn people off of, so much talk of the 12-5 and those big upsets that people are going to be looking for. And I really don't think a lot of that stuff is going to matter that much. Do you know what I mean? I see a lot of those high seeds just rolling through. So I take that same logic and apply that to Gonzaga. So as much as I would love to take them against, let's say, Memphis, and I could see like how you just painted that out makes total sense because Memphis is real. But I would like Memphis's chance against Gonzaga as opposed to Boise State's chances against Gonzaga. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I like Boise State to beat Memphis. So that's where things get so crazy, right?
Yes, that's
so
why
if I'm going through, so if you're going through my bracket, I'm like, okay, so I'm on Boise State. So then I got to take Gonzaga to beat Boise State, as I just laid that out, right?
Sure. Yep.
Things obviously change as we gamble, and if Memphis were to win, hey, you could talk me into that matchup where now I'm flipping here and I'm going to bet on Memphis to beat Gonzaga. Does that kind of make sense there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. As my cat has a sneezing fit in the background here, if anybody's hearing that.
For sure. So as we talk about, but as we talk about like just the bracket portion of it, yes. Yeah. I'm going to take Boise State. I see Gonzaga beating Boise State. I got UConn going through against New Mexico State. At the bottom there, I'll sprinkle in a little pick here because I like Vermont plus 5.5 over Arkansas. Now I think Arkansas wins a game.
Yeah.
But give me the points, right? Wow. And I like the points. And just because, again, going back to my theme of I like teams that shoot the ball really well, and Vermont has a bunch of seniors. They jack up threes. They're one of those teams where it's just, they get hot. They'll make it interesting. It'll be the game where, everyone's kind of hyped up because I think another upset is going to happen. A 13 against a 4 upset's going to happen, but no, Arkansas is going to win. But I'm just saying, give me the points. And I love those games where they have like the 6'8" center. That's not really a center. Right. Just a bunch of dudes running around, jacking up threes. I love that about March Madness. So give me that. Give me the points. But again, Arkansas wins. Arkansas, I think, will give Gonzaga a go.
Okay.
They'll give them a go, but still moving Gonzaga. Gonzaga doesn't lose until they lose to Texas Tech. Okay. That's where I got them.
Interesting. I would not have pushed back. I wouldn't have been surprised if you had Gonzaga going out to, well, frankly, either Arkansas or UConn. I thought that's where you were going to go with it. In either case, I will be on the points come the Sweet 16. We can obviously talk about that next week. You and I are mano y mano here on Arkansas, Vermont. I like Arkansas to beat Vermont, right? I think Arkansas had, in a way, again, different personnel necessarily, but like they had practice last year against Colgate, right? With Vermont being a very similar team stylistically to Colgate. So we're going to go mano y mano there. You could talk me into New Mexico State against UConn, but again, this is a situation where if I think UConn has a better than sort of fighter's chance, if you will, to beat Gonzaga because they have 2 senior guards, right? And that's where Gonzaga, like we don't have the Jalen Suggses of the world, right? Like Gonzaga can be beat in the backcourt matchup. And we saw that in their loss to St. Mary's, right? And when you're sort of picking stuff out in trying to nitpick, if you will, with Gonzaga, it's, they lost to Alabama, they lost to Duke, they lost to St. Mary's, all teams whose guards were just frankly better than Gonzaga's that day, right?
And we so know that guard play wins.
And again, you love your guard play, and well, you should in the tournament, right? Because you and I talked about the idea of like sometimes you can have too good of a guard play, or at least they think they're too good, and it sort of ignores the other players on the team. That's not really how Connecticut works, right? Like they obviously have a big man down low. They know, right? Dan Hurley has instilled to them like we have to get Sanogo the ball. But at the same time, we know that they run through those two guards. And so that's the one that I'm sort of interested in kind of like playing as a relative long shot in this as well, right? And so like if you had a couple of, couple of bucks on Memphis at 50-1, UConn would in theory be, obviously a candidate at, 20-1, something along those lines. Problem is, right? Relatively short spread and a dangerous team against New Mexico State, an Arkansas team who honestly, like if you had told me before the tournament started that Arkansas was going to make the Final Four and make the regional final, I'd be like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. But of course they get deployed in the Gonzaga region. Of course, everybody becomes a, sort of a prohibitive underdog in the Gonzaga region, at least from a market perspective, right? Because we've talked about it all year. And just to sort of break it down for people here, Gonzaga right now in the market, based on their point spreads that, concluded the season, the market thinks they're a 50, which is a massive number relative to everybody else who are sort of lingering around. It's actually kind of insane how many teams land between 40 and 42 in those ratings. Now, I don't have Gonzaga as a 50. I have them closer to a 45, which tells you like where I'm at with going to need to fade Gonzaga, because every game I'm going to look at it and I'm going to be like, man, that's 2 or 3 points too high. Oh, that's 3 or 4 points too high, right? And like, that's going to be the theme for this, right? So there's going to be a lot of spread bets going against Gonzaga, right? But as far as in advancing them in the pool, like, again, you and I talked about it on Sunday night. Gonzaga and Duke are going to find their way into this regional final, right? As much as I like Texas Tech, and I'm right there with you, and that's absolutely the right play from a bracket standpoint, maybe not necessarily from a betting standpoint, because I think that line is going to be closer to pick'em, right? And look at it this way, the difference between betting and brackets, right? Betting, if you have a pick'em line, it's assumed that it's 50-50 on either side, right? Like that's the point of the pick'em point spread. When it comes to a Sweet 16 matchup, right, you're looking at a different story here. Duke is 46.4% to win this, to win that game. Again, opponent, is sort of meaningless in that situation, right? People could think some complete other team is involved in here. I find that relatively hard to believe. But Texas Tech is 36%, right? So this isn't a 50-50 thing when it comes to the public's opinion, right? Most people have Duke, and that shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody here, right? But that's obviously different. So in your bracket, you want to advance Texas Tech, whereas betting on the point spread at a pick'em price. Now, listen, we might get a couple of points here with Texas Tech, right? And that obviously starts to create some value as well. But again, that's a matchup that we can look at later on. But I look at like Davidson and Michigan State. Davidson to me has a chance to make a little run here. But again, price matters. And if they're priced, let's say Memphis and Davidson are both 50-1. At your local sports book, right? Or the sports book that you use at the DRF sports book, for example, right? And I think both prices might be actually a little bit shorter over there. But if they're both 50-1, I rather take Memphis than I do Davidson. But if Memphis is 33-1 and Davidson is 100-1, which are available elsewhere, I'm going to take a shot with Davidson. And again, that's going to inform how I feel about that 7-10 matchup in my bracket and whether I'm really dying to bet it. Because if I can get Davidson into the next round against Duke, I feel like I'm kind of free rolling that bet a little bit at 100-1, because if they somehow, quote unquote, somehow pull off a win against Duke, now they'll be 7-point underdogs to Duke if Davidson beats Michigan State, right? So it's not crazy. It's not out of the realm of possibility that they beat Duke, but like, that's how I really kind of want to bet that area of the bracket, because I'm not dying to lay points with Duke. I'm not dying to take points with Fullerton. And I don't really want to get involved in this Michigan State and Davidson game sort of straight up. Though, again, if we get to a point with a lot of these coin flippy type games, or if we're getting 2.5, 3 points, then it's just going to be kind of an automatic play for me. And that's, again, from a thematic standpoint, it's going to be the Sheldon Alexander, when in doubt, take the points. It's going to be when we're getting a little bit of value, when we're getting a bucket of value or a plus in front of the money line. That's what I'm going to do with some of these games. And so when it comes to the first round matchups, like we talked about, like I was immediately on Georgia State at the big price there. I can't imagine that's going to go particularly well. I will be on Arkansas minus the 5. I wonder if we're going to see it go down a little bit in the next little bit. And then obviously, it's Wednesday morning. Rutgers and Notre Dame go tonight. Depends, I think, who wins that game. I'll tell you right now, I'll blow the surprise here. I'm on Notre Dame in this game. And so, I think Notre Dame has a chance to beat Alabama. And it's funny how like these play-in games and the matchups, the teams that wait for the team in the play-in game, right? We stare at these point spreads all week. And then we don't have a point spread for Alabama yet, right? And the game's going to happen tonight and the line's going to go up and it's going to be this sort of afterthought type thing that we don't spend 3 or 4 days on, right? And it's the same kind of thing, but to a lesser extent with Indiana and St. Mary's. We'll talk about that game obviously in a little bit, but it's like, oh yeah, by the way, like St. Mary's has a game and they have a point spread to look at. Oh, by the way, Alabama's in this tournament. Have you heard anybody talk about Alabama? It's like, no, not really, because there's kind of nothing to talk about just yet, other than this idea that, yeah, when and if, or I shouldn't say if, but when they have an opponent, then we'll talk about them. But by the time they get an opponent, like the tournament is going to have started like 12 hours later, right? And so that's a really difficult sort of thing to handle here, because you go, okay, well, who's going to come out of that little area? And are they going to give a problem to Texas Tech? Because I think Texas Tech obviously wins relatively comfortably against Montana State. And again, we've penciled Texas Tech and Duke into the Sweet 16. I've penciled in, one of those two teams, obviously, against Gonzaga. But like things could go off the rails here relatively quickly. And all it would take is Memphis getting to their potential, right? You mentioned like they are real. Like I would sort of say maybe, or they might be real, but if they are real, then they are a real problem. And it's the same thing for Arkansas and UConn here. So, I'm not dying necessarily to bet on Gonzaga, even at that minus 140 change in price, because again, we look at it and we go, okay, that's actually a really fair price relative to the public here. But if if you listen to this podcast, you read my stuff earlier on, you probably already have a Gonzaga plus 400 ticket in your pocket, which even from a week ago has changed, right? That number to win the NCAA tournament is plus 300 now. And all that happened was a bracket got created, right? And then obviously we were able to extrapolate money lines and that sort of thing. And so it's funny. It's like, okay, well, I've done what I've needed to do. And when it comes to sports betting, right? Sometimes the work needs to be done early and sometimes the work needs to be done late. When it comes to Gonzaga, the work was done early by grabbing that plus 400, a week and a half ago.
Yeah, I mean, Gonzaga, it's going to be so much focus on them and so much focus on Duke. And the one thing that does worry me about taking Texas Tech to make this little run here is that Texas Tech Duke matchup and how shady that could become as we try to force feed Coach K getting through. But hey, tons of time to talk about that story for another day for sure. As we keep things rolling though, and let's say we want to move to the next bracket. Let's move to the South, which I've talked about a bunch. We talked about on the pod Sunday night, which I thought this was a very interesting side of the bracket here. I like Arizona a lot. I haven't fully, like, in full disclosure, a bracket. I've stopped filling out an actual bracket and entering bracket tournaments a couple years ago, just because like it really serves me no purpose, right? It's just adding something else that's like, who cares? I just take that money and make extra bets on whatever, right? But the bracket becomes like an activity more, right? Like just to kind of plot out, okay, who can beat who, like type of thing, right?
Yeah.
With that said, I'm saying that because I have Arizona going, like, winning this region. Okay.
Sure.
Now, the reason I have Arizona winning this region, it's almost like we looked at it last year with Baylor in terms of we had so much time to kind of talk ourselves out of Baylor, if that makes sense, right? Like, I think Arizona is a really, really good team. And instead of just accepting them as a really, really good team, we try to pick at them and pick at the Pac-12 or just say, well, what about this team? What about, when really, no, they're just really, 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 really good. We know the Pac-12 has been good this year as well, and they've been amazing. So as we look at that region though, and we kind of build things out here, my one worry for Arizona in that region is Houston. And you look at that again. I talked about the 5-12 matchups and how everyone's going to be looking to make one of those picks. This is a buyer beware. We alluded to this on the Sunday pod. Don't take UAB. Just don't do it. You're going to want to do it. I get it. I understand. They've been suckering us into these 12-5 matchups every single year, but don't do it. Everyone loves that upset, but Houston is legit. I know you're all over it. You're talking about the Ken Palm ratings and all that fun stuff. And we broke it down as simply as no. The spread is 8.5 for a reason, right? Yeah. It's because this could get ugly early. But as we just stick at that top part of this bracket, though, Arizona and Houston, do you see that? How do you see that playing out? And more so, I guess, before we even get there, Houston and Illinois. Will Houston even get there? Because that's also a big boy matchup.
Yeah, that's, again, I mean, another theme, right, is, okay, that would be cool, but, right? And so, you look at this and you go, if you've listened to anybody over the last 4 days, and you and I have talked about it, sort of, predicted it, if you will, but like the love for Chattanooga, for example, right, is like I said, the Chattanooga choo-choo train, man, like the people are fired up.
It's just fun to say.
It's coming down the tracks, and people are dying to advance Chattanooga. They're dying to fade Illinois. And I don't necessarily disagree with it, because as you and I talked about, like, I don't love this Illinois team. And that's the type of thing that, of course, a lot of times comes back to haunt me, because it's 0-0, right? Everybody gets to start fresh. So whatever's happened in the past is the past. And that is another thing that we have to keep in mind, right? And from a positive and a negative standpoint, right? So if you're a team that exited your conference tournament early, or you're a team that went on a run to win the conference tournament, I'm here to tell you, neither of those things matter when it comes to the probability of you going on a run in this tournament. Being a hot team is great for sort of historical purposes, i.e. like, oh, remember when Connecticut did it? And it's like, yeah, I do. And like literally nobody else did it in between, right? And like, obviously you have some teams that have relatively easy conference tournaments and that sort of thing. You don't get the conference tournament national championship double all that often, right? Baylor didn't win their conference tournament last year, for example, right? It seemed like that worked out for, and you mentioned, obviously, like we're making, reasons not to like Baylor. And one of those reasons was lost in the Big 12 tournament. Guess what they did again this year? They lost in their conference tournament. Problem is, on the flip side, all of the winners of conference tournaments are in this South bracket. So we love every one of these teams, and they all come to it from different angles, right? And so when I'm looking at a bracket, when I'm looking to bet on these teams, on these games, and I'm looking to create value or sort of evaluate value, so to speak, is what I want are teams with excusable conference tournament losses. But what I don't want is the hot team that I have changed my opinion on because of what happened in their conference tournament. And so when you look at Arizona, Houston, Tennessee, Villanova, you've got all these teams, all of which won their conference tournament. Now, the funny thing is, I wrote about and bet, obviously, Tennessee to win the SEC tournament. So I obviously thought pretty highly of Tennessee before that tournament. I thought quite highly of Arizona. Right? Like, they are awesome. They are super fun to watch. They have, all of the sort of pieces that you'd want. And the interesting thing is, like, they get sort of crossed off by the sort of historical, comps, if you will, because they have a first time head coach, right, in Tommy Lloyd, because he doesn't have the experience, right? That's the theory, that he doesn't have any experience. Well, if you're sitting next to Mark Few for the last 5 years and you're going to national title games, like, he was there, like, all he was doing was just not sitting in the main seat. He was sitting one seat over. And so he did the talent acquisition thing that Gonzaga does, where he's gone all over the world to get talent. And he has clearly got that team playing in a way where they were down 12 to UCLA in the second half of that Pac-12 championship game. And it was erased almost instantly and unsystematically, like, not like fluky plays, no crazy calls, not going to the foul line over and over again. It was like fast break, post up layup, 3-pointer, and that was, again, without some of their top players being in the lineup, and of course Kirk Risa being out with an injury. And of course there always has to be an injury, right? The rule in March Madness is a top team has to suffer an injury right before the tournament to throw you off the scent. Problem is, nobody's getting thrown off the scent here. 43.7% of the population in bracket contests are taking Arizona to win this region. Again, it's hard for me to argue that, and that lines up relatively well with their odds to win the region. Again, funny how that works, right? Where they're around plus 140 to win the region. But when it comes down to it from a rating standpoint, right? We just talked about how like the market has Gonzaga like off the charts here, but I personally have Gonzaga at about a 45 as the best team in the country. I have Arizona as a 42. I have Houston as 41.5. And by the way, I have Tennessee at 41 and I have Villanova at 40. And so that's a literal take one number and subtract it into another number to get a point spread number, right? Like that is as basic as it comes. So take 42 and subtract it by 41.5. And you got yourself a half point spread, right? You literally have a pick'em game in Arizona and Houston. But if everybody's going to take Arizona, then game theory, strategic wise, like you kind of need to take Houston, right? And it's not that fun because as much as like maybe Houston's a fun team to watch, but certainly they don't get the publicity for that. And so, you know, that's the uncomfortable part. I'm like, man, I'd really love for Arizona to get through. And if they do, coming out of the toughest region, in my opinion, because of those four teams that are rated the way they are, if they do, they could win the national championship. But we're going to be put to a decision here from a betting standpoint in the Sweet 16. And from a bracket standpoint, we're getting put to a decision between now and noon. But the point is here is if you're trying to win a bracket contest, you have to do something different, right? Let's say there's 200 people in your contest. You have to beat 199 other people. We have to find edges and ways to do that to give yourself that opportunity. And if it's a coin flip game between Houston and Arizona, then that's the play that you have to make. Now, the good news is we get a full weekend of watching games and stuff before we have to make a bet on this game. So we can come back next week and go, okay, who do you like in this game? And the answer might be Arizona -1. But that's because we're just trying to get the cash, right? That's what we're just trying to win a 50-50 type of a bet. But from a bracket standpoint, you have to take Houston in this if you're trying to win your bracket contest. Now, you don't necessarily have to take Houston any further. That is entirely up to you. There are certainly some good candidates on the bottom half of this bracket.
Well, here's the thing, though, right? Because the way that I look at that top half, as mentioned, I got Arizona walking through, but I look at Houston as kind of being like the stat Ken Palm darling, for lack of a better term. And then you got Kofi, because I talked about the fact that one thing that I also find interesting in the tournament is taking just a star player or the best player. And Illinois is sitting there, and you kind of look at it and you think, I fell for this last year.
Yeah.
Right. So like I would see myself normally trying to talk myself into taking Illinois against Houston in that second round there, but I don't see that happening this time around. So you talk about, okay, now Arizona and Houston, that would kind of be the coin flip. But as we go to the bottom half of that bracket, as you mentioned, that's where things get really, really interesting as well, because you have, I know you like Tennessee a lot, right? But
yeah,
I mean, we've seen it time and time again.
Rick Barnes.
Are we going to put money on roll it out Rick here? Like, would we be that surprised if roll it out Rick loses to Michigan? No. Like, I can't say that I'd be surprised at that at all.
Not at all.
Right? And so like the variance between these Rick Barnes teams in the tournament where it's like, yeah, I could see Tennessee making it all the way out of the region, and I could see them going home after the second game. So that's super interesting. You go to the bottom half of that part there, and Villanova, another solid team. Obviously, you know, you like Coach Wright. He's been there before, obviously. So it's very interesting in that bottom half. But of course, if you could talk me into Michigan, you could talk me into Tennessee, and you could talk me into Villanova in that bottom region. But overall, I'm going with Arizona. If not Arizona, as they're the favorite, and that's like, cool, I'm keeping it chalk. If I had to pin you into a corner, Mr. Matt Russell, who is the next team that you would take from that whole South region as like the value pick?
Well, okay, so there's two different questions here, right? And just to sort of put a cap on that top part of the region there, the Houston-Illinois game in round 2 has Houston as about a 3.5 to 4 point favorite in that game. And so you mentioned Kofi, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, it'd be really tough not to take Illinois plus the points,
for sure,
right, in that game.
Oh, yeah.
And again, that further complicates things, right? So
but
be
points
ready.
Versus winning is different, right?
Of course,
points versus winning is different.
Of course, right? And there's obviously some very concerning metrics, and not just metrics, like their flat out record when Andre Curbelo is in the lineup, right? And he's this guy that's sort of this polarizing figure. But the reality is, like, the team just doesn't play as well, or at least their results aren't as good when he's in the lineup. And of course, he will be, which is a weird thing to say, right? Normally, we're wondering when guys are going to come back into the lineup. In this case, it's like, we'd rather him play less, please. As far as that bottom part is, listen, I think I love Jay Wright. Jay Wright's a great coach. Obviously, again, we talk about it from a football standpoint, right? Where Andy Reid wins a Super Bowl. And it's like everybody forgets for 20 years that Andy Reid had no idea how timeouts or the clock worked, right? And it's like, and then we're surprised again that like he doesn't know how timeouts or the clock worked at the end of the game against Cincinnati, right? Kind of similar vibes with Jay Wright, right? Where it was like, yeah, they kind of get knocked out of the tournament like really quickly a lot of the times, blah, blah, blah. But he puts together this recruiting class. And sometimes, as you know, in basketball, it's just about gelling, right? Is the chemistry of the team. And for him, it wasn't a bunch of one and dones, right? It was guys who played with, played together for a couple of years, et cetera, et cetera. And they have this magical run, right? Where they win a couple of titles in a short period of time. And now everything gets wiped away. I got the impression that Jay Wright was kind of surprised that his team won the Big East tournament at the end of that, right? And again, he's sort of sitting there and he's like really joyful about it. And it's like, that's a guy who feels joy because he didn't really think that this version of his team was going to be able to do it. And again, that was just the Big East tournament. And again, I'm sort of on record going like, man, I'm not really in love with any of these Big East teams this year. As we watch Xavier, for example, the team that people are weirdly trying to shoehorn in to the tournament, despite finishing the season 2-8, they got all they could handle last night from Cleveland State at home in the NIT. And so when it comes to little sort of tricks or however you want to sort of frame it, looking at the NIT and the conference, and how the conferences do over there is interesting to me, right? Like Utah State gets blown out in the second half by Oregon. And now I'm a little worried about the Mountain West. But when it comes to the Big East, it's like, oh man, okay, if Xavier, that's not a great showing. I don't think that much of Seton Hall or Creighton. So why am I getting too excited about Villanova? And so I'm sitting here and I'm looking at Loyola Chicago from a value standpoint, a team that is a pick'em game against Ohio State. And again, that might be leading us to the Wolves, so to speak. If Ohio State comes out healthy, they have all their guys, right? And they're going to have the best player on the court, EJ Liddell. And this game is basically a pick'em -1 on either side, kind of toggling back and forth. But if they can win that game, I think they can beat Nova. And again, right, like you get Loyola Chicago against Tennessee, like that has vibes of Illinois, Loyola Chicago last year, where all of a sudden you find yourself with Loyola Chicago in the regional final. And that's where pricing comes back again, right? At 50-1, 40-1, that's a pretty good bet. At 25-1, ceases to be a really good bet, right? So it matters what the price is going to be. But when I just look at that and I go, okay, which team are you most confident in? Again, like I think Tennessee is the best team in that group.
Yeah.
How did we get here? Right. And again, it's not a change in my opinion from the team because I had them to win the SEC tournament championship. And so I'm not changing my mind. It's almost like I'm uncomfortable with how, I don't want to say it this way, but like how right I was about Tennessee. It's like, this can't be, this world doesn't exist where I back Rick Barnes, they win, I back Rick Barnes again, and they win again. Like that's not a universe that sort of I have existed in my lifetime. Is you're shaking your head like, yeah, I mean, how could that possibly be? But when you look at the percentages, 19.1% of the population have them advancing to the Final Four, right? Which is right in line-ish with their odds, which, again, makes a ton of sense. So, because, if Houston faces Tennessee though, like, again, like I find myself going, why wouldn't you just take Houston? I think Houston can be that team that's going to knock Tennessee around a little bit. And so I find myself dragging Houston to the Final Four, even though I'm looking this weekend to take the points potentially with Illinois. Like that's the sick part of this whole thing. So again, I think it just comes down to Houston and you hope they win a couple of coin flips. And if they win those coin flips, again, 50-50 type things, you're going to be ahead of the game here when it comes to who you're going up against in bracket contest pools.
Well, this is why I stopped filling out a bracket, right? Because you end up conflicting yourself and confusing yourself. Not everybody is able to compartmentalize and say exactly what you just said, right? And understand that, hey, I like Houston to roll here on my bracket, but I'm going to take the points with Illinois against Houston. Yeah. Not everyone's able to compartmentalize. You're obviously very good at what you do, very good at explaining that to the layman's like myself. But for me, I needed some separation here. And so again, the bracket is an activity for me to like figure out, okay, cool. I like Houston to go through here, but they'll lose to Arizona. And then in the bottom half of that bracket, you know, I look at it and I see Villanova walking through, but I'm waiting to bet against Roll It Out Rick at some point, right? And like, I'll gladly do that. But I also want to just mention too, at a certain point, we talked about the 12-5 matchup, and I'm giving you the buyer beware again. Don't do it. Right? The buyer beware. People are going to be out here trying to tell. No, I'm just repeating it because we know that's going to be the favorite pick. People are going to take UAB. People have already been trying to talk themselves into UAB. Don't do it. One thing I do want to say though, in this South region, I like Michigan, the 11 seed, at -2.5 over Colorado State, the 6 seed. And I know that it looks a little weird because Michigan's obviously the 11 seed and they are favored, right? Yeah. But Colorado State, they play slow. They don't get rebounds. And, you know, 11 times, here's a very interesting stat. 11 times the worst seeded team has been favored in a first round game, and they've won 9 times outright. Yeah. So and Vegas is trying to tell you here what's going on, right?
Yeah. And I mean, again, the case against that is sort of sample size, right? Like not a huge sample necessarily. And if the better team, you know, and again, is the better team. That's why, you know, the seeding, I'll put it this way, like the seeding doesn't mean anything, right? Unless you're actually needing the seeds for some sort of pool that you're in where like seeds are rewarded. You mentioned, you know, the 12-5. Honestly, like you go through this and it's like the 13-4 games to me are a little bit more interesting than the 12-5 games from an upset standpoint, right? We talked about people's love for Chattanooga. I think you and I are on opposite sides on this game again, because this is more of a numbers play, but like I have these two teams rated pretty much identically in Colorado State and Michigan. So I think the line should be pick 'em, but again, what's the reason one team is favored over another team, right? Is it flat out ratings? Okay. Like boom, make the number off we go, right? You see that with some of these other games, you know, the 8-9, 7-10s, other 7-10s, et cetera. In this case, I think just the branding here for Michigan is the difference. Yeah. I think they're getting a couple, you know, Colorado State's getting a couple points here because of the branding on Michigan. We'll be interested to see if this goes to 3. Again, it's that sort of magic number that if this game's tied, you know, somebody's taking a step back 3 to win the game for whatever reason, even though the game's tied and all they need to do is drive to the basket. The referees will call a foul. I promise. Moreover, again, look at it this way. Either one of these teams is going to be about a 6-point underdog to Tennessee in the second round. And this is the last time we're going to talk, you know, on air about the tournament before the second round as well. So we have to sort of be ready for the second round because things are going to moving awfully quickly here come this weekend. But a +6 on Colorado State if they've beaten Michigan, or a +6 on Michigan against Tennessee, that would be a bet, right? That would be a bet for me. And so again, I'm sitting there fading a team. And that's why I don't, you know, as much as I love filling out a bracket, because it is like the most unique thing in all of sports. And like the dividing line in our friendship is that you don't fill out a bracket. And I'm like, how could you not do that? I mean, you do sort of, like you said, sort of.
I'm talking about entering the bracket tournament.
Yeah, of course.
Doing that.
Of course. But like, again, like that's the point is like, if you're sitting there with Tennessee going to the Final Four, even the regional final, you're going to be more hesitant to fade them even at a +6 number, right? You're not going to want to try to thread that needle, so to speak. You're going to be like, well, I just have them to win. Like, it's pretty important for me that they win the game. And like, maybe I'll throw them in a money line parlay. And then all of a sudden, like David Roddy is like doing work against you, right? And Nico Medved, who's like one of the better, you know, younger coaches in college basketball, you know, is causing a disturbance. But, you know, you bring this up and it's like, that's another example of the Mountain West. And again, if I just watched Wyoming kind of trip over themselves last night and I watched Utah State State blow a home game where they had the lead at halftime. And the next time I checked the score, they were down 15 to Oregon, a team that by rights was pretty much dead at the end of the season. My red flags are just absolutely flying here on the Mountain West, and I'm terrified for San Diego State. I'm terrified for Boise, right? And that's obviously another Mountain West team. And so, yeah, I'm a little less interested in Colorado State based on that, right? If I think this league is tough, but it shows, again, super small sample size, but in 2 games, once tournament time has started, that they might not be that tough. That's a big deal for me, right? So again, like I'm looking at this going like, okay, I don't love any of these teams as favorites in the second round. I mean, even Arizona, if they face like a TCU team and they're like close to 10-point favorites, I can see TCU dragging that game into the mud.
But this is totally my point, right? About the bracket and the bets, right? Like you end up talking yourself into bets based off of what you need in your bracket, which is like a $10 investment or a $25 investment. Right. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Whereas and it's not about the money, right?
That's about my point. And not everybody's able to compartmentalize that. That's the only part my point is. And maybe I'm a little slower, and that's why I'm not able to do both, because it just ends up being like, no, but I'm saying it ends up being like, okay, well, I want to take a 12-5 matchup, so let me take UAB, and now I'm on UAB in the points. Just because I want to chase this upset in a 12-5 matchup. That's where I find myself messing around here. But before we leave this South region, the last thing I want to say about this South region is obviously Arizona doesn't have a first round matchup, and that's because there's a game tonight. And we talked about this already on the Sunday night pod in terms of who we liked in this game. And I know that we did the whole thing about my boy, Peter Kiss. And I gotta roll with them, right? Like that's just where we are. I can't make such a high claim earlier on and then not take Bryant plus 3.5 points. Let my guy cook. That's where I'm gonna be tonight. You'll probably see those tweets flying from me tonight. And then they get smashed by Arizona in the first round. But in terms of his championship, this is your chance right here, Mr. Kiss. Lead the league in scoring, have one night where you're trying to drop 35 in the tournament game. Cool. More power to you. I don't even care if you lose. Just cover the 3.5 points.
Cover the spread. And that's exactly it. And that is exactly it, because the door is open for them to lose the game, but still cover the spread because this line has moved. And I talked about it the other day. Like, what type of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the person backing Peter Kiss, or do you want to be the person fading Peter Kiss? What does that tell us about society? And that's when the line was -1.5, -2. We're up to 3.5. So obviously somebody out there doesn't think that much of Peter Kiss and the Bryant Bulldogs. But we're getting to a point where even me, who I wrote about the first 4 early on in the week. Again, my biggest bet of that first 4 was, 2 parts. It was Texas Southern last night and it's Notre Dame tonight. I wrote that I'm passing on this game. I just don't want to be involved in this from a betting standpoint. But if you're going to keep bumping this lineup and we're going to see some 4s out there, okay, you're dragging me into interest in the Bryant Bulldogs. So I haven't made that bet yet. It certainly won't be to the level of the Notre Dame bet. It certainly won't be to the level of the Texas Southern bet that I was on pretty much instantly if you caught anything that we did on Sunday night. So yeah, I mean, I'm best of luck to you. Best of luck to maybe me if I end up getting a decent number here on a +4. Anywhere near -110 is something that I would do in that game. But I think a fun game to watch either way. But again, meaningless when it comes to your bracket contest.
Yes. So let's move on to the Midwest. And of course, Kansas is the number 1 seed in said Midwest. And as I look at this side of the bracket, to me, the thing that stands out in the Midwest is Kansas. And Kansas is weird, right? I've had a love-hate relationship with Kansas in my history of watching the March Madness tournament, where it's mostly a hate relationship because I never really buy them. And this is a year where they don't really have the top tier, like the top tier star, but this might be one of the better teams that, like, you know what I mean? In terms of being able to make a little run, maybe even surprise. You talked about Jay Wright surprising, his team surprising him. Maybe this is one of these years where Kansas is doing well, but they're better than maybe they might have thought. You know what I mean? Like, they have a really good shot, but they're not. Yeah. It's not. There's been other years where they've had better players. I'll say it in that way. right? I'm trying to be polite to them as a program in general.
Yeah.
But my overall thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
My overall thing I wanted to say about this side of the bracket is the talk about Wisconsin. That's more where I want to put the focus on here. But we can start, if you have something on Kansas there, we can start with the top half of that bracket and then move on to the bottom half, and I'll talk about Wisconsin after.
Yeah, so two things on Kansas. One, I think Ochai Agbaji is that dude. I really do. Like, that's sort of relatively, late bloomer, not one of these top 5 recruits, like, look out, here he comes type of thing. Like a guy who's developed under Bill itself. Like, you don't, I'll put it this way. Do you want Ochai Agbaji shooting a 3 if you're facing him? No, man, because that guy's going to make it. And when Ochai Agbaji goes up to the basket, whether he's got the ball or not, are you feeling comfortable if you're fading Kansas? No, you're not, right? He is doing both of those things. And there are a ton of, I think the derogatory term might be glue guy, right? There's a ton of glue guys on that team sort of keeping things together. The thing I'm worried about from a Kansas standpoint is the big guys, right? We've got David McCormick just hobbling around in that Big 12 championship game, right? And so if you're backing Kansas in this tournament setting and like it's the first round or the second round and you're just watching David McCormick hobble around. Now, again, this guy's game's not built on speed by any stretch of the imagination, but like it's concerning, right? And again, not a massive player necessarily, but from a glue guy perspective, Mitch Lightfoot went out with an injury in that Big 12 tournament as well. And so you go, okay, well, if those guys are compromised, say Lightfoot's out and McCormick is hobbling around, he's not able to play maybe as many minutes as he's used to, then you really start wondering what's going on. And so the interesting thing here for me is I'm looking at round 2 and a number that might surprise you here. And I'll put it this way. A team like Loyola Chicago, and you could make this case for Colorado State, Michigan, Tennessee, I feel like I have a pretty strong rating, right? I have a pretty accurate rating. I have Loyola Chicago as a 36, right? So I know when they play Villanova, what the point spread is going to be if they, win there, what the point spread is going to be in the next game, the point spread against Ohio State, like all of that stuff makes sense to me. A second round matchup here, potentially with San Diego State. Again, I'm on San Diego State minus the 2. We talked about that on Sunday night, or sort of Monday morning's podcast, if you will. The number here could vary kind of drastically because Kansas, my number's 41 for them. The market rating 42. My number for San Diego State is 36, but the market thinks more highly of San Diego State. They are a 38.5. And so if the market's using their Kansas number and their San Diego State number, we're talking about a 3.5 point spread. So as much as we look and we say, man, Kansas's route is pretty easy, blah, 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 blah. Would I be shocked if San Diego State, having beaten, who are they playing? Sorry, Creighton. I was going to say Seton Hall for whatever reason. Again, blue team in the Big East. If San Diego State wins that game and we're looking up and it's like, it's not going to be 3.5 because Kansas is obviously going to get consideration because of the branding element, but that line is going to be shorter than you think. And so when you're convinced that Kansas is going to make the Final Four and you look up and David McCormick's hobbling around and they are playing in a 4 or 5 point type spread game against potentially San Diego State. And man, honestly, even if Creighton ends up winning that game, Creighton would have then shown me something, right? They would shown me that they could handle the defense of San Diego State, and Kansas doesn't play the defense that a lot of people wish that they did. And so I'm looking at this going like, man, I like Kansas, but like we just talked about it, the sort of checkered history of Kansas, right? And sort of wondering when and if and how and why you might be on them or not on them. And it almost always, goes the other way that you think it's going to be. And so listen, that's college basketball. You could say that about just about any of these teams that you think have a paved road. But then we get into that next round too, where it's like, well, Iowa might be lurking. And I think that's a pretty good chance of that happening. By the way, Richmond at plus 10.5 is starting to get really interesting, as that line has moved up. And of course, Providence and South Dakota State is a matchup of two teams that either one of those can win the game. But I think either one of those is going down to Iowa. And then all of a sudden you start talking to yourself, now Iowa making the regional final, and you are back to where you were with Tennessee. Right? I like Tennessee going into the SEC tournament. I liked Iowa going into the Big Ten tournament. Both succeeded for me, but it's not going to be as easy as we think. And it's certainly not reflected in the regional odds.
Yeah, I like it. I think when I look at that matchup there, in that top half of the region. I really like Iowa. And, the thing is, you have Kansas, and we spent a lot of time talking about Kansas, and I never really buy into Kansas as mentioned, but as you said, it's a checkered past, right? So the way that I have that top half breaking down, I have Kansas losing to Iowa.
Okay.
And as I look down at the bottom half of that bracket, give me Iowa State over LSU.
Yep.
I look at that spread first off, and definitely on the +4. And I just think that they force turnovers. They're a very good defensive team. That's huge. But also, it's not like LSU is a bad defensive team. Like, they're a pretty good defensive team as well. So I just see a lot of turnovers, a lot of chaos in that game. And if that's the case, give me the points.
Well, and give me Isaiah Brockington. Give me Isaiah Brockington in that case, right? Give me the guy who's going to make the bucket. This is March Madness, right? This is star-making time. This is the time where somebody's going to make a bucket here. Now, LSU, obviously, people talking about Will Wade and all of that sort of stuff. Like, I don't care that Will Wade's not the coach anymore. Like, that means absolutely nothing to me. I have made zero adjustment. Zero. 2 words. Adjustment to Will Wade being no longer being the head coach at LSU, because honestly, he wasn't really doing all that much in the first place, right? We talk roll it out Rick, right? Totally. Like roll it out Will Wade, right? Or walk it out Will Wade. Wheel it out. Wheel it out. Yeah, we'll come up with something. Though I don't think we're going to need to, because I'm not sure we're going to see much of him in the future. Because if you can't pay players to play for him, I don't know why anybody would want him.
I got you.
So again, no adjustment. My line is -3 for LSU, right? And so I hopped on some +4.5 again. Does that mean anything as far as like guaranteed wins? No, of course it doesn't, right? But again, I want a team that has a better coach. That's the case with Iowa State. LSU's defense started to take a hit late in the season, and their offensive efficiency takes a hit whenever Xavier Pinson is not in the lineup. And again, so you think David McCormick hobbling around is a big deal? Xavier Pinson being on the sidelines potentially, again, re-aggravation, assuming even if he starts and all of that sort of thing. This could go really, really wrong here for LSU. And that's why I'll be taking Iowa State on the money line. So I'm right there with you as far as advancing them in a bracket.
Yeah. So give me Colgate. I'll take the points with Colgate, but Wisconsin wins, right?
No.
Follow me again. 14.
Shell, you heard me on Sunday. You heard me on Sunday. I'm not saying you follow.
Whoa. I'm not saying you follow me. I'm just saying, like, I'm playing it out in terms of compartmentalizing the bracket and the bet. Now, I'm not saying both those things are going to happen. I'm just saying Wisconsin, I do see them winning, but I'd like to take the points in this scenario. And it's because I just hate Wisconsin, right?
Yes.
And Johnny Davis, cool. He is the guy that will be able to get them some games, and he's not the traditional, like, boring ass Wisconsin dude. Cool. I get it. Overall, I have them losing to Auburn. I have Auburn coming out of the Midwest. That's who I'm rolling with here. I don't really like it because we talked about it on Sunday, and their guards, not really huge fans of their guards, interrupting what's going on with our guy Jabari. But at the end of the day, Bruce Pearl, let's see what you got, man. Let's see if you can figure something out. So that's where I am here. You don't like Colgate, which I get.
No, opposite. Oh. Shell, I told you on Sunday, I looked you directly in the eye and I said Colgate outright. Of little memory, my friend. Colgate's winning this game outright. I'm objecting to you saying Wisconsin's going to win the game. Now, yes, obviously, sort of more than 50% of the time, Wisconsin is probably going to win the game. They'll probably shoot one like off the referee's face, off the top of the backboard, and in the basket for the game winner, right? Like, that's the type of thing that Wisconsin's done this year, right? And a lot of that stuff is sort of quote unquote played. But this is sort of the reverse bracket of the South, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of teams to not like, especially in this half of the Midwest, right? And so we talked about Kansas and like how things could, in theory, get weird here quick, right? If it's not Kansas making the final or certainly making the Final Four, I don't know who it is. Like, that is the problem, right? Because again, I'm having a hard time. If you think Rick Barnes is an issue, right? Fran McCaffrey making the Final Four is an issue, right? I don't even
Bruce
think
Pearl is an issue.
Like, at least Bruce Pearl has made the Final Four, right? At least he's had those dudes and deployed those dudes in a way where they actually won 4 games to make it into the Final Four. Like Fran McCaffrey just does not do that, right? And so now we go to the bottom part of the bracket. I'm like, I'm dying to find a team here that I can get behind. And there just kind of isn't one, because here, I'll put it this way. Here's the Auburn issue. And the Auburn issue sort of, it affects everything else. If we look back at history, listen, there's the Middle Tennessee victory over Michigan State, right? 15-2. That was a shocker because Michigan State had just won the Big Ten tournament. They were clearly one of the top 3 teams in the country, right? To me, that's the biggest upset maybe that I've ever seen. Because when it comes to 2-15 or 3 versus 14 games, like if there's a vulnerable team here, they've probably shown it before the tournament has started. And that's the case with Wisconsin, but that's also the case with Auburn. So if we're looking at a 15-2 and we're trying to sort of pinpoint one of those, honestly, Delaware is a little interesting to me against Villanova, because Villanova can get cold. They can play a low scoring type of a game. But honestly, Jacksonville State is a little bit interesting to me, as far as 0 people are giving them any chance to beat an Auburn team who are in the last 9 games. Now, keep in mind, 9 games is a lot of games. It is 4 weeks of basketball, especially when you don't stay in the SEC tournament very long and you only play 1 game in that SEC tournament, and it's getting blown out by Texas A&M. You look at those last 9 games and they're like 5-4 or 4-5. And the best win is a road win at Mississippi State, where they needed overtime and they blew a massive first half lead in that game. And that's Mississippi State. Shell, where's Texas A&M? Where's Mississippi State? Neither of those teams are in this tournament. And that's the best result that Auburn has had in the last like 3 or 4 weeks here. So yeah, like the Jabari Smith thing, like, yeah, but I would have said the same thing about Jabari Parker with Duke back in the day. I would have said the same thing about Denzel Valentine on Michigan State back in the day, right? I would say the same thing about those players. And again, if Jabari Smith isn't being used appropriately, who knows what might possibly happen here, right? Like Jacksonville State at 10-1 on the money line is actually low-key interesting. But even if they make it past Jacksonville State, which again, they're supposed to do so, right? They're 15.5-point favorites. Miami or USC is the team that I think makes a run. And it's problematic because either one of those teams can win the game. I'm going to take USC because I think USC matches up a little bit better than Auburn. So this is sort of a working backwards type of thing. I understand. And listen, here's what's going to happen. Miami's going to win this game at the buzzer. And then I will be just wandering the streets telling people that USC was going to make the regional final. Like I'll just be grabbing strangers by the collar out on the middle of the road going, the Trojans were going to do it. And of course, history will never know, right? We will not see that alternative history, if you will. But I'm going to take USC. I'm going to take USC in this first game against Miami. I'm going to take USC to beat Auburn in the second round. I'm going to then take USC because, again, look at the group that they're playing above that, right? LSU, we don't love. Iowa State, we don't love. We certainly don't like Wisconsin, and Colgate making the, the regional final sounds like a kind of insane thing that somebody would say out loud. And so I'm going to take USC. I'm going to be disappointed by it when it gets ruined basically on the first or second day. But I'm going to take USC. I'm going to take them all the way to the regional final. I'm going to do a couple of future bets here as well. They're 12-1 to make the Sweet 16. 12-1 to make the Sweet 16. Like that's pretty good for 2 wins, one of which they're a coin flip in. And again, I'm saying there's a 0% chance that their second round matchup is Jacksonville State, right? Like it's not 100% thing that Auburn is going to beat Jacksonville State in my mind. And so that's the team. And again, if you said to me, man, I like Miami over USC, and thus I'm going to take Miami to the regional final, honestly, I'd be kind of okay with that. Right. I think that game is sort of the value, premise in all of this. I have USC as a 1-point favorite over Miami. So there technically isn't value within the construct of that game. But there's better value on USC plus the points against Auburn. There is better value USC in sort of a pick'em type situation against LSU or as a small favorite against Iowa State, right? The value on USC is going to come in the second, third, and then potentially fourth rounds here. But again, they got to do it in the first game. And so that's going to be a big game for me because, again, I have that team. You don't have a lot of 8-9s or 7-10s that are advancing further. This is that one for me. So USC is going to be my play. I think they have the length and the shooting ability to be able to deal with Auburn if they can get by Miami in the first round.
I love it. I love it. And that's why we do this pod, to give differences of opinions, see where we match,
Absolutely.
see where we don't match, and just try to figure things out, because that's the craziness of March Madness. And yes, again, just to recap there, because there are some picks there also given out in that region, both like Iowa State +4 over well, I like Iowa State +4 over LSU.
Money line, all of it.
And then Colgate at +7.5 over Wisconsin. Those
Money
bets,
line,
we both
all of it.
seem to agree on. I like it. And in terms of, as I said, just because I'm forced to fill out a bracket essentially and like plot things through, I got Auburn going through coming out of this region. Let's finish things off though with the East region. And as we look into the East region, I'll just say this off the front end. I got Kentucky coming out of this region. Mm-hmm. And that kind of makes me nervous because anytime I'm rolling with Coach Cal, I just know that, things might not go the way you need them to go. You're going to cut to him late in the game and he just has that look on his face where he's like getting really mad at everybody except for himself.
Yeah.
But hey, story for another day. Things I find interesting about this region, though, that I find very interesting about this region. I have them going through, and at the top part of this bracket, right, the Baylor side of the bracket, I actually have UCLA making moves through that part of the bracket. I just find it very interesting. I think that's a team, obviously we saw them last year make a serious run, so they've been there, and I think that matters a lot. Yep. Also to just pick wise, I know I'm throwing a lot of things at you here, so kind of just letting you go wherever you want to go in the East region, but pick wise, I like Virginia Tech +1 over Texas. That's kind of just a pick that I will give you as well in terms of the first round. But in terms of the East region, you tell me, who do you got? Are you sticking chalk, or is there someone kind of a little more interesting you have coming out of the East, or making run in the East? Not necessarily coming out of it, but making a run.
All right, let's get this cat right out of the bag here for starters. I have Kentucky to win the whole thing. I think Kentucky wins the national championship this year. Right. So that's chalky because it's a 2 seed, but it's also the favorite in the region. Right. And again, this is the sort of difference between seeding and betting. Right. And we always lean on the betting element. And the reason why is Baylor has a tough road here. And obviously, I don't think they're going to win it back-to-back years. That would be the most incredible achievement for them to win or even make the Final Four in back-to-back years with the different troops that they have. And in a lot of cases, some really young guys. And that's going to be the issue atop that bracket, especially if they end up facing North Carolina. And again, this is a situation where am I dying to lay points with North Carolina? No. What I might do is I might take a favorite that I'm really confident in, something along the lines of a UCLA, maybe Houston, something along those lines, and I'll throw them in a money line parlay with North Carolina so that I'm effectively getting North Carolina at a pick'em, right? That's the way that I want to play that game against Marquette, because this line is getting higher and higher and higher. So if I bet on North Carolina, that's how I would do it. I have no interest in laying points with North Carolina in that game. But what I will be doing is if North Carolina wins, and again, we're doing this for entertainment. This is the tournament, right? We made money over the course of the regular season, over the course of conference tournaments. That's great. This is supposed to be the fun part, right? So again, you don't need a bet on everybody. So if I just took North Carolina in my bracket, that would be enough for me to be entertained, if you will, against Marquette, beyond just the basketball element and the fact that I just love the tournament. But it also means that I would be sort of implicitly interested in betting on North Carolina in the second round at a +6, something along those lines. My projected numbers have that +6.5. Again, it's North Carolina, so I can see that you might get, not as good of a number as that should that matchup happen. And so again, we start looking at some money line possibilities for the second round, like that one I have sort of circled, red flagged, et cetera, et cetera. As for the UCLA potential St. Mary's matchup, I'm not positive St. Mary's gets in. And that's the other thing where, again, we go back to the whole who picked whom thing on the bracket challenge. People just firing away here on St. Mary's at 76.2% in the first round, not even having an opponent, right? Like 7-8 million brackets were made before there was even an opponent for St. Mary's. Now, how much is that going to change once people go like, oh, Indiana looked okay last night. Again, the winning team's always going to look okay last night, right? Like that's just going to be a thing that people think. But even if they didn't look particularly good, they looked like a team that, listen, that's going to be a 3-point spread, something along those lines. I haven't seen an opener yet for that, but my projection is 3 for St. Mary's in that game. Like, is that a team that should win 76% of the time? No, right? Like that's I think
I saw it at, it is 3.
Oh, it is 3. Okay, there you go. Right. So boom, nailed it. So like, am I dying to bet on St. Mary's? Am I dying to bet on Indiana? No. But again, from a bracket standpoint, if everybody's just going to submit their bracket at 76% for St. Mary's, okay, go for it. Problem is, if St. Mary's goes and plays UCLA in that next round, that's another 3-point spread. In this case, UCLA being the favorite of 3 points. And I could see St. Mary's winning that game. Again, this is a team that beat Gonzaga not 2 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden, St. Mary's starts getting interesting. St. Mary's against North Carolina, potentially, or even St. Mary's against Baylor. And all of a sudden you go, okay, like I see a road for St. Mary's potentially. But again, I don't even necessarily want to use them in my bracket in the first round because of sort of a game theory concept. So that one's going to be, that whole top half of the bracket is going to be a game-to-game type situation for me, where honestly, pretty much just taking the points. And I think that's going to be, listen, that's a theme a lot of the time. It's going to be a lot of the theme here this tournament. And then we get to the Texas. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Well, I was going to say, now we get to the Texas-Virginia Tech thing. And again, I think there's literally one game in each region where you and I are going mano y mano here. Because what I say at the start of the podcast about these conference teams, who do I want? Who do I don't want? I don't want a team I've changed my mind on because of the conference tournaments. So Tennessee didn't change my mind on, had them bet the entire way. Iowa didn't change my mind on, right? So I can still sort of back them with a clear conscience. Backing Virginia Tech at this point, I wouldn't be doing with a clear conscience. I would be doing it under the idea that I got excited about Virginia Tech beating North Carolina comfortably, beating Duke comfortably. But again, there's an alternative universe where the 3-ball doesn't go down against Clemson in their first game in the ACC tournament. And Virginia Tech's not even here, right? The sliding doors moment, right? Where the ball goes through the hoop and they win the game. And so if that doesn't happen, and let's say they still end up making this tournament, right? They still get seated in this field. A week and a half ago, this line is 4 for Texas. And it's 1 right now. And it's because Texas lost to TCU in the Big 12 championship game. Not really an insulting thing, right? TCU, a tournament team fighting for their lives, had played Kansas 3 times in March, right? They were pretty sharp, pretty honed. Chris Beard, good coach. Again, we talked about it, like show me something. I'm not dying to move Texas into my Final Four by any means, but they have the talent on the team. And Chris Beard has obviously had success in the tournament, whether it was with Little Rock or obviously Texas Tech. And I'm getting 3 points of value here potentially. I mean, at the very least 2. I kind of just have to close my eyes and bet Texas. Now, the problem there is I'm dying to fade Purdue, and they're not going to lose to Yale, I don't think, but they're going to lose to either Virginia Tech or Texas, because what happens here is if Texas wins this Virginia Tech game, I'm going to feel more comfortable about it, right? They will have shown me something that they beat a pretty good Virginia Tech team. And by the way, if Virginia Tech beats Texas, then that's going to show me that winning the ACC tournament wasn't the fluke that maybe sort of it might have been. And so in either case, I'm going to be backing whomever makes it out of this game against Purdue. Now, unlike some of these other games where I'm like, man, I totally understand why USC and Miami, that spread is the way that it is. Some of these 8-9s, why that spread is the way that it is. I guess I understand why the spread is the way that it is, but it is not correct. Texas should be a 3 to 4 point favorite in this game. And just the way that I do things, like I have to bet Texas Tech in that situation, the same way that I have to bet Iowa State because I think they should be 3 point underdogs and they are 4.5 point underdogs when I made that bet, et cetera, et cetera. All of that, again, just leads me to say, okay, this is going to be a real sort of, break in the river here, a fork in the road. And I'm going to go one way or another here. I'm just going to have to go with Texas here. And I'm going to be on Texas against Purdue. And then we get into the bottom half. I obviously let the cat out of the bag. I'm on Kentucky all the way through here. I think Kentucky beats Texas in the Sweet 16. And then I think they beat whomever in that top part of the bracket. I haven't determined who I think is going to be in that part because Indiana winning last night obviously threw a little bit more of a wrench into the St. Mary's plans, so to speak, because I think they would have had a much better chance in dealing with what Wyoming was going to bring to the table. Obviously, Wyoming losing last night sort of proves that they might not have been for real. But yeah, to me, it's Kentucky here. I mean, there isn't a bet to be made from a regional standpoint. This isn't as spicy as like USC or like sprinkle on Memphis and Davidson or like Loyola Chicago at a value standpoint, right? Like I get why UCLA is a pick here. I mean, UCLA, it might be Kentucky against UCLA in the regional final. And that's the thing that's the thing that I'm most excited about this tournament. I mean, think about the regional finals here, right? A Duke or Texas Tech against Gonzaga. Pick which one of those 4 teams in the South that we talked about. Like, let's go crazy. UCLA, Kentucky in a regional final. Like these are gold. Mm-hmm. So as much as like the first round is going to be super fun, we're going to have all these different point spread bets. We're going to be tracking our bracket, Survivor, all of that stuff. Man, the second weekend is where it's going to be absolutely on fire. And I can't wait for that part.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with you too. Like as I plot out the rest of the bracket here, I'm with you. I have Kentucky winning against Arizona.
Okay.
And I just think, at the end, I guess the final 4 teams, if I'm going all the way through here, Texas Tech, Arizona, Auburn, and Kentucky. Those are my 4 teams that I have, with Kentucky winning over Arizona, as I just said. And again, like I'm just filling out the bracket for like that reason, because again, another thing that ends up happening is you're cheering towards the end because like, hey, I still have like 3 of my final 4 or whatever it is. Yeah. And then now the spread comes out for, let's say, that Texas Tech Duke game, let's say, right? Or even, I'd taken it one step back, but now I want to bet on something else, but that's counter to my bracket. That's kind of where I live at, that I'm like, okay, you know what? This is an activity to like kind of help me plot out some things. Sure. But where we're trying to make the money, it's not with the bracket. That's kind of where I'm at. But any like just last closing final thoughts here in terms of the tournament as we wrap up here on this pod?
Yeah, I'll do my final 4 here. So again, Kentucky, and again, part of that is Kentucky, man, like that's super chalky again. I'm using the percentages here on the Who Picked Whom page to sort of not validate, but sort of almost reverse validate, right? And so Gonzaga is 27.3% of the people have Gonzaga winning the championship. Think about it this way: if you're in a 100 person pool, and you have Gonzaga winning the championship. Okay, they then win the championship. Work backwards from there. Now it's you against 27 other people on how well you did on the rest of your bracket, right? And so you picked the national champion and you are still like barely halfway there to actually winning your pool. Like that's really tough. And you can't tell me that Gonzaga has do some quick math here, 4 times the chance of Kentucky of winning this tournament. Kentucky right now is being selected by 6.8% of the population. So Shell, if we're in that same 100 person pool and Kentucky wins, well, it's us and 6 other people, right? Or even 5 other people that we have to beat with the rest of our bracket, which is what we're doing with, whoever we've got out of the South, or what we're taking, how early we take out Gonzaga, for example. Like, is it in the final 4? Is it, earlier than that, et cetera, et cetera. And part of the reason, not reason necessarily, but part of the element of having Kentucky is it's sort of this built-in thing where like Gonzaga can't make the final if I've got Kentucky making the final, because they're on the same side of the bracket. And so that opens me up to not even just taking Gonzaga into the Final Four. I can now take them out a round earlier, knowing that I'm not, that I can sort of take that risk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the winner of Duke and Texas Tech. And in some cases, that might be Texas Tech, but I'm going to say it's Duke in this case. And I don't love it. It's going to be painful, again, watching that Duke-Texas Tech game, because I like Texas Tech as a team, as a program, much more than I do Duke. But I think you and I both know we're probably going to see this Duke-Gonzaga regional final hell or high water. So I'm not going to push against it in this case. I'm going to lean into it. So I've got Kentucky over Duke in that side of the Final Four. I'm going to put Kansas into the Final Four, only because I don't see a better option that I'm comfortable with. As much as I sort of think from a value standpoint, Iowa is interesting, and they will be a bet for me along the way. As much as I think, again, we talked about the USC Miami deal, I'm not taking either of those teams to make the Final Four. I'm certainly not ready to trust Auburn at this point. Kansas is the only team that I feel like I can trust based on the matchups going through. So I have Kansas there. I have them beating Houston in the Final Four, back-to-back Final Fours for Houston. Again, that is a contest-related play. That is going to be my difference maker amongst the 7 other people, the other 7% of the people who have Kentucky winning. My difference maker is going to be in the South. And then that allows me to take Kansas over Houston in the Final Four, and then Kentucky over Kansas in what should be an electric final on Monday night. Again, I think there is just enough there with, the starting point. You have to get the winner, right? This isn't going to be UConn 2014 or 2015, whatever year that was, where you didn't need the winner of the tournament to win your bracket contest, because nobody had UConn, the 7 seed that year, winning, right? It was whoever, did you have the team that made the final? Well, then, yeah, you won, because nobody's getting points for the champ. In this year, one of these 10, 12 teams is going to win. So you need to get the winner correct. And at 7% of the population, that's a good enough number for me to be backing Kentucky, who, again, what do I want? I want a team that exited their conference tournament with an excusable loss. That excusable loss was a particularly bad shooting night for Kentucky, and Oscar Tshiebwe going out with foul trouble, literally fouling out when that game was still in the balance. I don't see that happening again. I think this is a team that can beat you a couple of different ways, inside and outside. The depth is there. They're healthier than they have been at any other point this season, with Severe Wheeler and Ty Washington being at full strength here. They have who I believe to be the National Player of the Year in Tshiebwe, and they are not being talked about in the same way that people are talking about, obviously, Gonzaga, Duke, Arizona, and even Kansas because of that road. Give me Kentucky here. This will be one of those rare opportunities where I think Kentucky has a better than 7% chance. The odds reflect that at plus 800. They have a better than 7% chance of winning this championship, but less than 7% of the population have them winning this championship in their bracket. And to me, that is phenomenal value for the Kentucky Wildcats.
Phenomenal value for the Kentucky Wildcats. And listening to this pod hopefully was great value for everyone listening. And on the way out, just a reminder, tonight on Wednesday night's games, I'm on Bryant +3, and Matt is loving Notre Dame. And I will join you on Notre Dame as well. But as always, my dude, where can the people find you online for more information all March long?
Yeah, man, at Emrus Authentic on Twitter. Tweeted out the other day, if anybody's interested in playing Survivor for the NCAA tournament, we didn't get a chance to talk about strategy necessarily. I don't know that there sort of is one. You and I have been doing it for 8 years now. I don't know that either of us have a sort of salient strategy on any of this. I think we both have won one. I think you've won it 1 year, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You won once. I've won it once in the 7 previous years that we've done it. So at least we know something of what we're doing. But even though we've both won it, honestly, I think neither of us really could tell you how we did it. That being said, it's really fun to play. It's sort of a different take. People say like, oh, don't do brackets anymore, just play Survivor. It's all kind of the same thing, right? You need, like you said, you need to map things out in the same way that you do with a bracket. Of course, you don't necessarily have to submit that bracket into a bracket contest, but certainly I'm all about doing all of these things, man. Like, I'm just so excited for the tournament. I don't know how you spend it, but Thursday is couch day for me. That's where, like, on my own, then a buddy comes in from out of town that night and we watch the games at night. And then in Friday morning, we're off to a local large sporting bar restaurant place that I don't want to give free pub to. We go there and spend the day there, and it has a very sort of Vegas sportsbook vibe that, you know, again, not to sort of get off the rails here, but like, people talk about going to Vegas for March Madness, and like, that sounds great. I've been there for the Final Four. It was, you know, a great experience, a great weekend. It's Vegas. It's always going to be. But honestly, man, like, these days, everything you need is on your phone from a betting standpoint. And if you can go to a great spot that isn't necessarily a sports book, you can go to a sports book in Las Vegas, you're probably just going to be betting on your phone anyway, right? It's all just kind of the same. And so honestly, I've never felt the need to go to Las Vegas for March Madness weekend, because I can sort of make that happen here. We've been fortunate living here in Canada that we've been able to do that for, you know, as long as we have. Nothing changes there. Thrilled to get back to it this year after missing 2 straight years of being able to do that out in public.
Yeah, can't wait. It's going to be an interesting couple days, and really appreciate you, my dude. We'll get you back on to catch up on what happened this weekend in the tournament. It seems so crazy that it's finally here, but it is. So thank you, my dude, for stopping by. We'll catch up down the line.
Thanks, brother. Can't wait.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder. If you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. Of course, got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.